The fire was ruled an accident. 5 children were declared lost in the blaze, and that should have been the end of it. Except when investigators searched the ashes, there were no remains, not a single bone, from 5 children. And 80 years later, nobody has ever been able to explain where they went. This is the Sodder family. Christmas Eve, 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. 5 children went to sleep that night. Their house caught fire. Their parents got out. Their siblings got out. But Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty vanished. No remains, no explanation, no closure, ever. But here's what makes this case different from every other tragedy you've ever heard. The phone line had been cut before the fire started. The ladder George needed to reach his children had been moved before the fire started. Both of his trucks that worked perfectly the day before would not start that night. And the man who threatened George Sodder 2 months earlier told him his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed was the same man who sat on the jury that ruled the fire an accident. This is one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in American history, and it has never been resolved. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who this family was. George Sodder was born in Georgia Sodder in Tula, Sardinia in 1895. He was 13 years old when he arrived alone in the United States, an immigrant with nothing who built everything from the ground up. He found work on the Pennsylvania railroads, carrying water and supplies to other workers. Eventually he moved to West Virginia, started driving, then launched his own trucking company, hauling coal and freights through the Appalachian Mountains. He married a woman named Jenny. Together they had 10 children. 10. In the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, they were exactly the kind of family people noticed. Loud, warm, hardworking, Italian. The kind of house where there was always food on the table and always noise. George was also outspoken, particularly about politics. He was publicly critical of Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. In a community with strong Italian ties, this was not a popular opinion, and some people made sure he knew it. In October 1945, just 2 months before Christmas, a life insurance salesman came to the Sodder house. George turned him away. The salesman left with a warning. He told George his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. George reported it. Nothing was done. 2 months later, the house went up in smoke. But here's what George and Jennie could never accept. Their children were not destroyed because there was nothing left to prove that they ever were. December 24th, 1945, Christmas Eve. The Sodder family spent the evening together. Maren, the oldest daughter, 19, had been working at a shop in town and came home with gifts for her younger sisters. The little ones were so excited they had asked their mother if they could stay up late past bedtime. Jennie said yes, a little later than usual. It was Christmas. George and his older sons had been working all day and had already gone to bed. Jennie took the youngest, 3-year-old Sylvia, upstairs with her and reminded the boys still awake to put the cows in, feed the chickens before they went to bed. 5 children were still downstairs: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, Betty. At some point around midnight, Jennie was woken up by the telephone. A woman's voice on the other end asked for someone who didn't live there, then laughed, then hung up. Jennie noticed the lights downstairs were still on. She called down to the children. No answer. She assumed they had fallen asleep. She went back to bed. At approximately 1 a.m., she smelled smoke. The roof of the house was on fire. George woke up and tried to call the fire department. The phone line was dead. He ran outside to get the ladder, the one he kept against the side of the house to reach the upper floor windows. It was gone. He tried to reach the children by climbing his truck to get the upper windows. The truck wouldn't start. He tried a second truck. Also wouldn't start. Both trucks had been working perfectly fine the day before, but now wouldn't start. He broke a window with his hands and tried to climb inside. The flames drove him back. He sliced his arm open on the glass. He kept trying. George Sodder kept trying to get back inside the house, while it burned until it was physically impossible. A neighbor called the fire department. They did not arrive until the following morning, around 8 hours after the fire started. By then, the house had been burned completely to the ground, and the 5 children were nowhere. No one had seen them come out. No one had heard them scream. No. Maren, their oldest sister, would later say she stood watching the windows the entire time and never saw a single face appear. "I never smelled burning flesh," she said years later. "They say you can smell it for miles. I never did." The fire was ruled accidental, caused by the faulty wiring. The 5 children were officially declared lost in the fire on December 30th, 1945. But George and Jennie could not accept that, because when the ashes cooled and investigators looked through the debris, there were no bones. Not one. Here's the thing about fire. Even the most intense house fires leave something behind. Bones do not fully disintegrate for hours, even at temperatures of 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. A standard house fire burns nowhere near that hot, and this fire burned less than an hour. A crematorium operator later confirmed to the family it would be physically impossible for the 5 children's remains to leave nothing detectable in those ashes. Therefore, the family started looking at everything else that night more carefully. When it was examined after the fire, the line had not burned through as you would expect in an accidental fire. It had been cut cleanly, deliberately. The ladder, George's ladder, was found days later, hidden under an embankment, 23 miles away from the house. Someone had moved it there before the fire. The trucks, both vehicles that failed to start that night, started without any issues the next day. Mechanics found no fault with either of them. The Christmas lights? The lights on the outside of the house stayed illuminated in the early stages of the fire. If the cause had been faulty electrical wiring, the lights would have gone out first. And the man on the coroner's jury, who ruled the fire accidental and declared the children lost in the blaze, the family's private investigators later discovered was the same insurance salesman who had threatened George 2 months before Christmas. The same man who said the house would go up in smoke was on the jury that ruled the fire was an accident. Therefore, George and Jennie made a decision. They were not going to stop. They were not going to accept the official conclusion, and they were going to make sure that nobody forgot the names of their children. George and Jennie spent the rest of their life looking. They wrote to the FBI. Director J. Edgar Hoover wrote back personally, saying the matter appeared to be local and outside federal jurisdiction. His agents offered to help if local authorities gave permission. The Fayetteville police and the fire departments declined. The West Virginia legislature held 2 hearings in 1950. Afterward, the governor told the Sodders the case was hopeless and closed it at the state level. The FBI took it as a possible kidnapping. If the children had been taken across state lines, they followed leads for 2 years, then dropped the case. But the Sodders didn't drop it. They printed flyers with the children's photographs and offered a reward, $5,000, then doubled it to $10,000 in 1952. They built a billboard on the highway outside Fayetteville with the children's face on it and questioned, what was their fate? Kidnapped? Or are they still alive? That billboard stood for nearly 4 decades. Anyone driving Route 16 near Fayetteville could see it. 5 solemn, dark-eyed children staring out from the side of the road. Insights came in. A woman named Ida Crutchfield, who ran a hotel, reported seeing the children approximately 1 week after the fire. She said a man was gone with them. When investigators arrived at the hotel, they were gone. Other witnesses reported seeing children in a car on the night of the fire itself, being driven away from the scene. But nothing was ever confirmed. Nothing was ever proven. And then, in 1967, something arrived in the mail that changed everything for the family. Jennie Sodder received the letter. Inside was a photograph. A young man who appeared to be in his 30s. Dark hair, dark eyes. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, Louise Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Little boys. 80132 or 35. If this was real, if the photograph showed Louis Sodder, who had been in his 30s by then, it meant at least one of the children had survived. The family hired a private investigator to trace the letter. He was unable to find its origin. The postman mark was from Kentucky. Nothing else could be established. The photograph was never identified. The sender was never found. Jennie kept that photograph for the rest of her life. George Sodder spent the remainder of his life building a memorial garden. On the site where his house once stood, he covered the basement with 5 feet of earth, and Jennie tended the garden every day for the rest of her life. But as she tended to it, she began to believe that the children might be alive somewhere. George passed away in 1969. He never had an answer. Jennie passed away in 1989. She never had an answer either. Their youngest daughter, Sylvia, the 3-year-old who was in the house that night, the one Jennie who had taken upstairs with her, spent her entire adult life continuing her parents' search. She said the fire was her earliest memory. She told a reporter in 2013, I experienced their grief for a long time. I promised my parents I wouldn't let the story die. Sylvia passed away in April 2001. She was 79 years old. She died without an answer too. Here's what I want to be honest with you, because this case has 2 different readings and both have real evidence behind them. The official position is that the children passed away in the fire. Investigators say the absence of remains is not as unusual as it sounds. The fire may have burned hotter in certain areas, and the search of debris was not as thorough as modern methods would require. There's also this. Bone fragments were eventually recovered from the site and sent for analysis. The report found it came from an individual aged between 16 and 22, not matching any of the 5 children, but also showing no signs of exposure to intense fire, which raised more questions than it answered. Those fragments later disappeared from the chain of custody, making modern DNA testing impossible. The family's position is that the evidence of interference is too insignificant to ignore. The cut phone lines, the missing ladder, the trucks that failed, the threat made to them 2 months earlier by the man who then sounded the jury that ruled it accidental, and the sites and the photograph. But here's what I keep coming back to. Whether those children passed in that fire or whether they had been taken away, George and Jennie Sodder spent 40 years never knowing, tending a garden for children who might be alive somewhere, staring at a photograph that might have been their son, putting up a billboard on a highway and waiting for someone to recognize their children's faces. That Uncertainty is its own kind of suffering. The Sodders case is officially unsolved, and it has been for 80 years. And given that the youngest of the 5 children would now be in their 80s if they survived, it is likely we will never know. But I think about George breaking a window with his bare hands, trying to get back into that fire. I think about Jennie tending a garden every day for children she wasn't sure were in it. I think about Sylvia keeping a promise to her parents for 79 years. Some stories don't have an ending. This is one of them. Sources are linked in the description below, and I'll see you in the next one.